Ladies and gentlemen. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael Music, and yeah, today we're going to be talking about the fear of criticism. So, a little background story of what I'm doing is I'm reading this book called Think and Grow Rich, and the reason I'm reading this out loud live is because I truly think that this is a very interesting philosophy uh, that has helped a lot of people become millionaires, and I'm curious to see, given that where I'm at in my life, whether or not teaching this or just sharing this with the public can help me become a millionaire itself. So I've been in love with this book. I started reading it when I was 19, and yeah, that's a little background story about it. So today we got through all 13 principles already of the philosophy, and what we're going to do now is we're going to dive deep into the six basic fears. And this fear that we're going to talk about today is called the fear of criticism. And this is a fear that I feel all people have, including myself. And so, at least sharing it and identifying what it looks like, maybe that can really help us out in the future. So yeah, that's the intro. I'm gonna start reading. We're on page 337 of Think and Grow Rich. If you do want to tune in, and the heading is the fear of criticism. So just how man originally came by this fear, no one can state definitely, but one thing is certain: he has it in a highly developed form. Some believe that this fear made its appearance about the time that politics became a profession. Others believe it can be traced to the age when women first began to concern themselves with styles and wearing apparel. The author, being neither a humorist nor a prophet, is inclined to attribute the basic fear of criticism to that part of man's inherited nature which prompts him not only to take away his fellow man's goods and wares, but to justify his action by criticism of his fellow man's character. It is a well known fact that a thief will criticize the man from whom he steals, that politicians seek office not by displaying their own virtues and qualifications, but by attempting to besmirch their opponents. So I just think that's interesting how politics is kind of a possibility for the start of this fear. Keep in mind, I think this book was written in 1938, and doesn't that look a lot like what it is today? Okay, page 338. The fear of criticism takes on many forms, the majority of which are petty and trivial. Bald headed men, for example, are bald for no reason than their fear of criticism. Heads become bald because of the tight fitting bands of hats which cut off the circulation from the roots of their hair. Men wear hats not because they actually need them, but mainly because everyone is doing it. The individual falls into line and does likewise, lest some other individual criticize him. Women seldom have bald heads or even thin hair because they wear hats which fit their heads loosely, the only purpose of the hats being adornment. But it must not be supposed that women are free from the fear of criticism. If any woman claims to be superior to man with reference to this fear, ask her to walk down the street wearing a hat of the vintage of 1890. The astute manufacturers of clothing have not been slow to capitalize on this basic fear of criticism, with which all of mankind has been cursed. Every season, the styles in many articles of wearing apparel change. Now, who establishes the styles? Certainly not the purchaser of clothing, but the manufacturer. Why does he change the style so often? The answer is obvious. He changes the styles so he can sell more clothes. For the same reason, the manufacturers of automobiles, with a few rare and very sensible exceptions, change styles of models every season. No man wants to drive an automobile which is not of the latest style, although the older model may actually be the better car. We have been describing the manner in which people behave under the influence of fear of criticism as applied to the small and petty things of life. Let us now examine human behavior when this fear affects people in connection with the more important events of human relationship. Take, for example, practically any person who has reached the age of mental maturity, in parentheses, from 35 to 40 years of age as a general average. And if you could read the secret thoughts of his mind, you would find it you would find a very decided disbelief in most of the fables taught by the majority of the dogmatists and theologians a few decades back. Okay, so what is he saying here? He's saying that you find someone that who is much more mentally mature, and you will actually realize that they really disbelieved a lot of the things they were taught, and however they're keeping it to themselves. Not often, however, will you find the person who has the courage to openly state his belief on this subject. Most people will, if pressed far enough, tell a lie rather than admit that they do not believe the stories associated with the form of religion which held people in bondage prior to the age of scientific discovery and education. Yeah, I feel that. I feel that same fear of criticism of speaking up against some of the things I was taught in my CCD classes, and definitely is relatable there. So, why does the average person in this day of enlightenment shy away from denying his belief in the fables, which were the basis of most of the religions a few decades ago? The answer is because of the fear of criticism. Men and women have been burned at the stake for daring to express disbelief in ghosts. It is no wonder we have inherited a consciousness which makes us fear criticism. The time was, and not so far in the past, when criticism carried severe punishments. It still does in some countries. So, yeah, just like my personal thoughts, I guess sidestepping and thinking of like, okay, what really caused the fear of criticism? And truthfully, if you spoke out back in the day, in history, you could have been like lynched for stating your beliefs. And so definitely has its roots all back there. And I think that's interesting to point out like where does our roots of the fear of criticism come from if we want to work on identifying this fear. Okay, bottom of page 339. The fear of criticism robs man of his initiative, destroys his power of imagination, limits his individuality, takes away his self reliance, and does himself damage in 100 other ways. Parents often do their children irreparable injury by criticizing them. That's interesting. I wonder if anyone else has out there has like this old story of a parent just not in a right state of mind, yelling at you when you were a child, and it just hit in such a way. And it actually is interesting that that old story sticks with you to this day. It's cool that Napoleon Hill points out that parents often do their children irreparable injury by criticizing them. The mother of one of my boyhood chums used to punish him with a switch almost daily, always completing the job with the statement, "You'll land in the penitentiary before you are 20." He was sent to a reformatory at the age of 17. Criticism is one form of service of which everyone has too much. Everyone has a stock of it, which is handed out gratis, whether called for or not. One's nearest relatives are often the worst offenders. It should be recognized as a crime. And in parentheses, he puts, in reality, it is a crime of the worst nature. for any parent to build inferiority complexes in the mind of a child through unnecessary criticism. Wow. I definitely getting a lot of old story popping up from that, and it's just something to keep in mind about just how much damage you can do by really unnecessarily criticizing a kid, especially so young. Um, I feel like that's where a lot of this fear may truly come from, especially because most of our beliefs were created before the age of 8. So that's really interesting. Okay, moving along. Employers who understand human nature get the best there is in men, not by criticism, but by constructive suggestion. Parents may accomplish the same results with their children. Criticism will plant fear in the human heart or resentment, but it will not build love or affection. Okay, so he gives a little solution to instead of criticizing people, he's saying it's better to use constructive suggestion. So that's a good thing to point out. And it's also interesting that criticism will not build love or affection. So if you criticize someone, and even though you love them and are ultimately trying to do what's best for them or like help them out in a way, criticizing them at the end of the day will not, you have to ask like what is the result I want, and criticism will not give you love or affection or build that. So if that's what you want when you do help out a loved one, then I'm glad that we're pointing it out that criticism really isn't the way. Okay, now we're going to talk about the symptoms of the fear of criticism. This fear is almost as universal as the fear of poverty, and its effects are just as fatal to personal achievement, mainly because this fear destroys initiative and discourages the use of imagination. So, what does that mean? It destroys initiative, which is like the desire to just get started, right? So, fearing what people think essentially is like the first wall to like really stopping me from getting started, and then it discourages the use of imagination. So that's interesting too, that this fear, it seems like it puts me in a bubble, and even though my imagination can think of whatever it is I want and no one can stop that, this fear does discourage the use of really using my imagination to its fullest. Okay, the major symptoms of this fear are: one, self consciousness, generally expressed through nervousness, timidity, in conversation and in meeting strangers, awkward movement of the hands and limbs, and shifting of the eyes. Two, lack of poise, and this is expressed through lack of voice control, nervousness in the presence of others, poor posture of body, and poor memory. Three, we got personality, and that is lacking in firmness of decision, personal charm, and ability to express opinions definitely. The habit of sidestepping issues instead of meeting them squarely, and agreeing with others without careful examination of their opinions. I had that line underlined: agreeing with others without careful examination of their opinions. That's something to ask myself. Is everything people say, am I just like, oh yeah, yeah, that's true, like that makes sense? Or do I have to like double take them kind of question, like, well, where'd you get that information from? Okay, number four, the fourth symptom of the fear of criticism is the inferiority complex. This is the habit of expressing self-approval by word of mouth and by actions as a means of covering up a feeling of inferiority, using big words to impress others, often without knowing the real meaning of the words, imitating others in dress, speech, and manners, boasting of imaginary achievements. This sometimes gives a surface appearance of a feeling of superiority. So I underlined boasting of imaginary achievements, and I'm wondering why I underlined that due to the inferiority complex. Because I'm wondering if there was anyone I know that like they were bragging about this thing, and you're like, did that really happen, or are you making that up? And so that's the what I think about when I hear the inferiority complex. All right, number 5 is extravagance in the symptoms of the fear of criticism. This is the habit of trying to keep up with the Joneses by spending beyond one's income. 6, lack of initiative. Failure to embrace opportunities for self advancement, fear to express opinions, lack of confidence in one's own ideas, giving evasive answers to questions asked by superiors, hesitancy of manner and speech, deceit in both words and deeds. Okay, so that was lack of initiative. Next, we're on lack of ambition. Okay, so this is the mental and physical laziness, lack of self assertion, slowness in reaching decisions, easily influenced by others, and the habit of criticizing others behind their backs and flattering them to their faces. The habit of accepting defeat without protest, quitting an undertaking when opposed by others, suspicious of other people without cause, lacking in tactfulness of manner and speech, and unwillingness to accept the blame for mistakes. All right. So that was the end of the fear of criticism. I'm going to pause right there and just dive deep into this fear because I will agree that I think this is definitely right up there with the fear of poverty. So the fear of poverty is like at least pretty self-explanatory. It's like you're scared of being broke and having that mindset. However, the fear of criticism, I noticed, is something that you don't quite realize as blatantly when you do this self-analysis. However, it is very detrimental to I guess Napoleon Hill, I guess like what I'll say is what I learned, what I liked is it really detriments your self-initiative, which is just like the driving me to get started. And it kind of puts a cap on my imagination. I noticed when I started doing these live streams that I my imagination just expanded in terms of what I can do in terms of making money online. And before I started and I had this fear of criticism, that kinda, like, was holding me back from starting, my imagination was so limited. So that, is definitely what I learned and what I liked, like, just the effects of what this fear does. And furthermore, um, yeah, I would definitely suggest writing down maybe what is, like maybe write down like fear of criticism at the top of a paper in all caps and say, now that I learned a little bit about the fear of criticism, this is what I'm going to do about it. And maybe make like a bulleted list of just a couple of things that you can do now that you have identified this fear. And so I'm going to go over the symptoms of this fear again. I won't say them all, but let me just like reiterate them pretty fastly. So we got self-consciousness, a lack of poise, a personality, and by personality it means like agreeing with others without careful examination of their opinions. And then we got inferiority complex, extravagance, which is spending beyond like your income. You got lack of initiative, lack of ambition, and the last one, yeah, that was it. So those are the symptoms. Yeah, it's powerful stuff. We can go on this topic for a while, actually. I know my mentor Sean talks about addiction to approval, and I feel like that falls right in line with the fear of criticism. And so keep in mind that this fear is located in the subconscious mind, so it's not as blatant, and it's kind of something that it's almost hidden. It's almost like you don't even know it's there. I didn't know it was there until like I finally had it pointed out to me multiple times. Um, yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys if there's any thoughts you have on this fear of criticism. It's so much deeper than what I'm saying. Like this fear, I'd say for me, I probably got the fear of criticism the worst because I'm not really I guess I am having the fear of poverty still. But I would say fear of criticism would be probably at the top of my list personally, and then the fear of poverty. And then the others I kind of am conquering, and we'll go through them as we go through the list. But I would definitely say the fear of criticism is my biggest enemy to defeat. So sharing this is quite honestly like a big help for me. What else from this chapter? So how did the fear of criticism get started? What do you think was the root causes of this fear? And was it the fact that it dates back to when politics started? Did the fear of criticism date back to you maybe getting criticized by your parents? So what do you think was the start of the fear of criticism for you and just in general? And what do you think about okay, so I'm just going to say this. A lot of people do have some disagreements with what they're taught in religion, and yet you'll find in most of the minds of people that they're not going to speak up against it. And as a matter of fact, if they were pressed to say what they really believe, they would actually lie and say, "No, I completely agree with the church. Like what you guys are teaching in religion is totally fine." They would rather lie than state what they really believe. And that reminded me of the time, just a story, I guess, was Socrates. And I think he disagreed. I think it was the Greek gods, if I'm not mistaken. And he was like, nah, like there's not all these Greek gods out there. And this is truly what I believe. And he drank the poison rather than conformed to their beliefs, right? And that is what really set mankind ahead 1,000 years. So I thought, wow, that takes true courage to like really state what you believe. And I'm not saying it's easy to state what you believe, especially if it does go against some of like the things that we were programmed with as children. Because I know personally, I went to a Catholic CCD really early on in childhood, and so they programmed me right away, like, oh, if you sin, like you may not make it into heaven. And luckily, like I don't believe in that, but like I don't believe like that like a sin will hold you back from getting into heaven. But it definitely like it's still hard for me to like express that out loud live to a lot of people. Um just like things like that. It's an interesting conversation, I guess, to have. Um and lastly, the last thing I guess I would say that I learned from this section was just especially like parenting. I thought it was really interesting that it should be Napoleon Hill states that it should be recognized as a crime, and in reality is a crime of the worst nature for any parent to build inferiority complexes in the mind of a child through unnecessary criticism. Because it's so interesting. It's like you can think about it like the parent thinks that they are helping that child, like toughening them up and giving them thick skin by like truly criticizing them. But what that does to the child really does last with them. And I'm not saying my parents criticized me a lot, but like there's definitely been a moment or two where they have, and it's like, ooh, well, that's like still something that's sticking with me, and I gotta now undevelop. So I think that was quite interesting in this sphere. I guess another thing I will say is so he touches this reading was pretty short. Napoleon Hill touches upon the fear of criticism additionally in the chapter on persistence. And he brought up like, especially when he was given the task, Napoleon Hill, of creating a philosophy of Think and Grow Rich, and spending possibly 20 years on creating this philosophy. His immediate thought is, oh, what are they gonna think? Like they're gonna call me crazy. And that was probably the biggest fear blocking him at the time. So I will say, my final thoughts is, this fear is no joke. I'm not saying I conquered it, because I still am. The only reason I'm reading this is to help me conquer it. And yeah, this stuff's pretty serious. This is what truly holds a lot of people back, the fear of criticism. And I think it's definitely something worth having a much deeper conversation about. So yeah, I would suggest writing the fear of criticism on a piece of paper, and say, with this knowledge, I now intend to dot dot dot, and maybe make a 3 bulleted list of what you intend to do, knowing what the fear of criticism is. And now you know the symptoms of it. One I keep saying one final remark. I just got another download. I like the book Think and Grow Rich so much, because it's a book on self-analysis. So that's why this book can never get old, because you're always evaluating yourself at different periods of your life, and asking myself these deep questions, and like identifying the symptoms, like which ones have I outgrown, which ones do I still have and need to work on. It's this self-analysis that I think truly can be beneficial for my growth, because like I can be thinking that I'm growing all this way, but if I'm lying to myself, then I'm just lying to myself. And so I really like how Napoleon Hill in this book, Think and Grow Rich, really dives deep into like true self-analysis, and he emphasizes the importance of, no matter how embarrassing or how painful it may be, just do whatever it takes to get the truth, right? Like get the truth about yourself, and figure out what to do with that truth afterwards. But like that's why I find these books so interesting, because I think finding out the truth is so important. Okay. Well, those are my final thoughts on the fear of criticism in Outwitting the Ghost of Fear. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the fear of ill health, right? And it's interesting because we just came kind of near the end of the pandemic of COVID. So we have personally seen the fear of ill health. We have seen what that has done to an entire world. So I'm very curious to dive into this fear. And yeah, that'll be tomorrow. I want to say thank you all for watching on Facebook Live and YouTube Live, whether you're watching this in person or you're watching this maybe the replay. I just want to say thank you for contributing to the conversation. I am obviously not a master at this book, but I'm always curious to hearing your inputs, because I think this is some good stuff. So, bye, Facebook. I will see you guys. And YouTube, until we meet again in time and space, who knows? You may be seeing this 1,000 years in the future, and I may be long gone. But if it helps you, so be it. All right, cool. Until we meet again in time and space. Bye for now.